Metamorphosis is a biological process by which organisms undergo significant changes as part of a necessary period of growth. It is intense, it is uncomfortable, but only through this process can one mature and become something more. My name is Nina Yoshida Nelson. I am a mezzo-soprano. I am a co-founder of the Asian Opera Alliance, and I am an artistic advisor at Boston Lyric Opera. I have performed the role of Suzuki from Puccini's Madama Butterfly well over 150 times, and I am also thrilled to be returning this fall as we get ready to bring Madama Butterfly back to the stage. Through this process, I have gathered colleagues from across the Asian American community to explore the complex and sometimes sticky cultural narratives surrounding Madama Butterfly. Join me as we explore together, grow together, and discover a new butterfly, one with wings to stand the test of time. Had you asked me in early 2020 what my job was, I would say without a doubt, it was that I was an opera singer. There was not much else that I was. I might have said I'm a mom or a wife, but my job was an opera singer. And then we moved into COVID, where everything shut down in our industry. And all of a sudden, everyone started thinking about what we were doing, what type of art we were creating, and what effect this art that we were creating had on the people who were coming to see it, especially with the anti-Asian hate movement and this racial reckoning that our whole country was going through. The arts and opera had come to a complete standstill, and we had time to look around us and see what we were creating and make some changes. So all of a sudden, now I'm not only just an opera singer, but I've found this path in diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting. And primarily one of the reasons that I have ended up here is because in my career, I've sung over 150 performances of Madame Butterfly, and I really have a very intimate knowledge of the opera. And with operas like Madame Butterfly, there's really been a push in our industry to move away from what some of us might call caricature and more toward playing a respectful character on stage. And you might have seen Butterfly before, where you see the chorus walking around, shuffling their feet. You might see, the chorus members giggling behind their fans and doing all these things that now we might think of as perpetuating stereotypes of Japanese people or Japanese Americans. In my 150 plus performances as Suzuki, it wasn't until recently that I actually got to work with someone who really is an expert in Japanese movement. My guest today, Kevin Suzuki, is one of those people we turn to for help. Welcome to the podcast, Kevin. I'm wondering, how does a young, tall Asian American man become a traditional movement instructor and cultural consultant for a place like Atlanta Opera?
I'm not that young, but I am tall. I've been doing Japanese dance my whole life. I started learning Japanese folk dance when I was about 5 years old from my mother, who founded a company called the Japanese Folk Dance Institute of New York in 1992. So we're celebrating 30 years
Wow.
this year. And yeah, I've sort of been doing Japanese dance my entire life. And right now I've taken over as director of the company. I think part of the reason why somebody like me gets called in to work on productions of Madama Butterfly is because through the course of what I do as a dancer, in traditional dance, you have to know a lot about culture. You have to know a lot about movement. You have to know a lot about choreography and costumes and wigs and makeup. And it's kind of a source of knowledge that you have to know to do what we do.
Mhm.
And so it's almost, it's not an accident, but it's things we need to know in order to do our regular job, which is, dance performance, teaching,
Mhm.
choreography, and preserving, traditions that have been going on for over 1,000 years. So
Mhm.
because of that background and training, it's we can be called into a production to work on the cultural aspects and the movement as well.
You know, um, the first time I had traditional movement instruction was on the stage of Portland Opera in 2019 doing Butterfly, and that's where we met. Both you and your mom were with us for the entire rehearsal period, which was just such a luxury. Because if you ever do get a little movement here and there in opera rehearsals, it's usually one day or a couple days where someone comes in and works really briefly with you. But you guys were
Right.
there for 3 weeks, I think. And, both myself and the woman who sang Butterfly, who was from Japan and had also sung hundreds of butterflies, learned new stuff from you and your mom. And it was just amazing to think that I had done so many performances and I had been doing things wrong the whole time. And it wasn't until you guys came in and you were like, I don't think that's right, that I learned myself what
Right.
I had been doing wrong. So, can you tell me a little bit about what that experience was like for you guys sitting in 3 weeks of rehearsals?
Yeah, well, first off, let me just say my mom is amazing.
She is.
So I don't want you to think that just because somebody knows Japanese dance, they know all this stuff. My mom knows a lot of stuff, and she's passed on a lot of that stuff to me.
Hmm.
So I don't want to. I want to make sure that we let the world know that my mom is very special and
She
she's
is.
awesome.
Yeah.
So let me just say that. But in terms of working before Portland, we were doing the same thing. We'd get called in.
Hmm.
We'd worked with a bunch of different opera companies coming in. Never traveling. A lot of
Hmm.
times, if the person playing, let's say, Butterfly, was in the city, we'd work with them for a day or day here and there. Let's say.
Right.
We would. I think we worked with one opera in New York City that was we worked with Butterfly, Suzuki, and I think one of the geishas as well.
Hmm.
And but we work with them for like 2 or 3 hours, and that's it. And so you try to impart as much as you possibly can. You can't really do that much, really in a couple of hours, and that's
Right.
probably what you experienced as a performer.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just kind of like, okay, I kind of know how to give somebody tea, but I don't know how to do anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
The Portland was amazing because it was the first time we were actually brought in, and we were working with costume and wigs and makeup before we even went there to make sure
Hmm.
that was all set up and really done properly. We got there. We were helping with fitting Butterfly's costume to make sure that it looked. It didn't, because these costumes aren't actual kimonos; they're
Right.
stage kimonos.
Yeah. Yeah.
So trying to make it look as good as possible,
Hmm.
even though it's not constructed like a kimono. Because
Right.
you can't, because you need quick changes and stuff, and you
Uh huh.
can't actually wear a kimono on stage. It's impossible.
Right.
But being there for a few weeks and being able to be there every day in rehearsal and work with everyone and work with all different, we were part of the creative process, and that's something that had never happened before.
Yeah, it was really special, and, like, looking over on
Yeah,
the sidelines or whatever, and seeing you guys moving with us and practicing what you thought maybe our movement should be, it was just like
right,
it was
yeah,
something that had never happened, and it was a
yeah.
really neat experience.
Especially, because one of the things is, unless we see the set and we're on the set, it's hard to know what you need to know.
Right.
Because if there's a set where you're coming in and out of the house constantly, and
Yep.
that entrance is on the stage, well, then you need to know how to come into the house properly,
Right.
as a servant, let's say.
Right.
Whereas if that entrance is off screen, who cares? You just walk on screen.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if unless we're there in person and know what the set's going to look like, we can't give you all the information you need to move through that space in a way that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. I remember that one of the things we did, especially like as a
Right,
servant, opening the door, and all of a sudden you're
right,
like, no, when you close the door, I think remind me if I'm wrong. This was 3 years ago, but if you close the door, you need to bow when you close the door, right? Is that what,
Right. Yeah.
you need to kneel
Yeah.
and
Or yeah,
bow?
it's right.
And I
Right.
had never done that. And we talked about, taking shoes on and off as we were going in and out of the house. And
Right.
it was something that had never been discussed before. So it was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a lot. It's a lot of information, and like I said, it's you know, Japanese culture has a lot of this kind of stuff. It's highly ritualized, and so
Mm-hmm.
you really need somebody who knows the culture to teach you how to do that stuff, because unless you grow up there, you're not going to know. It's about operating within a society with those sorts of rules. If you haven't lived in that society, you don't know those rules, and you don't know how to operate within the space and within
Mm-hmm.
different social situations. And so, yeah, you really need somebody to come in and kind of like walk you through that.
Right. One of the potentially problematic things that happens with Butterfly, or that a lot of, Asian Americans specifically talk about with Butterfly, is that it was written by a, Italian man who
Yeah,
never went to Japan and
yeah,
did not know
yeah,
the culture. So are
yeah.
there things as a movement instructor that like the music and the dramaturgy maybe doesn't line up with some of the movement that you would expect to see, or does it all is there a way to make it all work?
I mean, most of it. I mean, yeah, you're right. It's written by an Italian guy who's never been to Japan. So yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's if he got everything right, you'd be like, you're a savant.
Right.
You've
Before
never
the
been
age of
somewhere and got
internet.
everything
Right.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Before TikTok, you figured it out.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah. So I think the source material. There's stuff that's wrong,
Mhm.
right? There's stuff that's wrong that just
Right.
doesn't make any sense,
Mhm.
right? Does it rise to the level of being really egregious? I mean, again, you go, okay, he never visited.
Right.
So if he gets stuff wrong, I can kind of understand why that happened. The issue is this: it's the staging. It's
Mhm.
not the source material. The source material in places is wrong,
Mhm.
but it's not wrong to a level that it doesn't rise to a high level. To me, the issue is the staging. And
Right.
so that's where people have to come in and work with the director and say, okay, don't do that, don't do that. I would say one of the issues, for example, for me, as somebody, let's say, working with Butterfly, is a lot of time they always put some sort of like really stereotypical like fan movement in there,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
it's always something that's it looks like something from that Mickey Rooney would have done. Like
Right.
it just makes it's not from because I know Japanese dance. I know what a
Right.
Japanese dancer would do, and I know what Japanese choreography looks like. And that is not Japanese dance. It's just some crap that some white choreographer in Hollywood came up with for some racist movie from the 50s, right?
Right. Right.
And
Right.
it's just a trope that stayed
Right.
on stage and in movies for a long time, and it's stayed on stage way longer than it has in movies.
Right.
So it's like taking something like that and saying, okay, I'll give you authentic movement that's going to look good and
Yeah.
better than what you have in there.
Right.
And so it's stuff like that. So to me, it's not the source material as much as what the production decides to do.
Yeah, because it's the staging that can really perpetuate these stereotypes that
Exactly.
we've all grown up
Exactly.
with.
It's. I mean, like there's nothing in any libretto that says put people in yellow face.
Right.
There's nothing. Nothing says like to put the makeup like this.
Yeah. Right.
That's not in any opera.
Yeah.
But people decide to stage things in certain ways.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So you will be joining us in Atlanta for, I think we said it's about a week that you'll be there with us in person
Yeah, yeah,
for
I'll
the
be there a
first
week.
week of
Yes. Yeah.
rehearsals.
Hmm.
Talk to me a little bit about how you see this week going. And then also, I'm asking two questions at once, but I know you've been working as the cultural consultant as well. And so you've
Yeah.
already started working on costumes and stuff. So talk to me about
Yeah.
this process, not only um, working, on costumes and looking at things before you come in, but then also getting into the rehearsal process.
So a lot of the cultural stuff happens beforehand. Other cultural stuff will happen afterward as well, because some of it has to do with movement.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take costumes as an example.
Uh-huh.
So one of the challenges with the costume part is that, a lot of the costumes are not designed by Japanese designers who understand traditional Japanese clothing.
Mm-hmm.
And also, sometimes companies rent costumes.
Right.
So there's only so much you can change with a costume if it's really wrong. So it's mainly a process of looking at the costumes and just maybe making a couple of adjustments here and there. In terms of culture, you're talking about certain scenes like, suicide, how to do that in a way which is culturally consistent.
Mm-hmm.
The wedding scene, just, various scenes and going through them and just, and sometimes there's stuff you can't really fix. So you try to do the best that you can. So there's certain stuff that can be changed, and there's certain other stuff that, you really just have to try to find a workaround for. And in terms of movement, it's, it's working with different people and different scenes, and it's working with Suzuki, and it's working with Butterfly, and making sure that Butterfly's movement is consistent with her status, making sure her friends, if they're geishas, making sure their movement is consistent with their status, making sure that it's not cartoonish. I tell geishas, like, you're not cartoon characters. You're beautiful, you're beautiful,
artists,
exquisite women. Yeah, you're companions, but you're trained in dance and singing and music. You're trained, you're women of status, and you should hold yourself like women of status and not like cartoon characters. And making sure the movement is different. You don't want everyone's movement to be the same, and so it's also giving people individual movement and things that they can call their own.
You touched on something that I asked a little bit more, but I'm wondering if you might be able to tell us a little bit about the history of geisha in Japan. Oftentimes in the West, we, this assumption
Prostitute?
is that a geisha is a sex worker, a prostitute.
Right.
But from what I understand, that's not what it is at all, right? And
no.
So a lot of times, some of the problematic things that are referred to in Butterfly is that she was a geisha, and people just assume, oh, she was a prostitute. But really, it's quite different.
I'm trying to find sort of a Western equivalent. And like I said, these are women who are trained from a very young age to be professional entertainers. That's what they're entertainers.
And they leave their families, right? And they go and they live together. And
not that prostitutes didn't exist,
right?
But geishas were certainly not prostitutes. No. And unfortunately, it's sort of, I think it's a stigma that stays with just the word.
I think, people just assume that this geisha will be this cute, little, tiny, doll-like Japanese woman. You've got these two tropes. You've got this geisha type, Asian woman, and then you've got the dragon lady, right? And that's how oftentimes how Asian women are portrayed on stage or in the movies or on TV. And oftentimes what happens is what we see on TV in front of us is then what we assume with the people who we see in our communities. And I think it's really important work that you're doing, making sure that we're not reinforcing these stereotypes on our stages. So give us a little insight before we sign off. I know you've already looked at the costumes. Have you made any changes to them? And if so, what are they and why?
Not too many changes. The costumes are actually pretty nice.
Yeah.
They're actually pretty nice. A couple of things here and there that need to be adjusted. Some things that are really, unnecessary, like just extra accessories that could be taken away, just stuff like that. The really important thing about the kimonos is just, the kimono is a very simple garment. It's just got a couple of squares. It's very simple, but it's all in how you wear it, and that's the important part.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I've learned so much, and I can't wait to see you in person and see this production on stage in Atlanta.
Looking forward to it, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin.
Wait. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Metamorphosis, a limited series from the Atlanta Opera podcast. The executive producers are Tomer Zvulun and Ashley Marakian. Matt Dykman is the producer and editor. I am your host, Nina Yoshida Nelson. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts. It's a great way for more people to find our content. And be sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date on new releases from the Atlanta Opera podcast. The Atlanta Opera's production of Madama Butterfly runs November 5th to the 13th at the Cobb Energy Performing Arts Center in Atlanta, Georgia. You can purchase tickets for any performance at www.atlantaopera.org/tickets. If you are unavailable to join us in person, you can experience the live stream of this production from anywhere on Friday, November 11th, only on Spotlight Media. Learn more at stream.atlantaopera.org.